Hello, and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Tian Yu. Coming up in this edition, Israel and Hezbollah have been attacking each other amid growing fears of escalating tensions in the Middle East. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has cancelled his planned visits to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Mongolia after a magnitude 7.1 earthquake hit southwest Japan. And police in Kenya have fired volleys of tear gas as small groups of protesters return to the streets of Nairobi. We begin with the Middle East. Palestinian medics report that Israeli forces have stepped up airstrikes across the Gaza Strip, killing at least 40 people. The attacks hit two schools in eastern Gaza, where at least 15 civilians lost their lives. Meanwhile, the Israeli military has reissued evacuation orders to Palestinian residents in eastern Han Yunis. They warn of imminent action against militants firing rockets from the area. Akram Al-Satari reports.
As a matter of fact, there were two bloody attacks taking place in different parts of the Gaza Strip, one of which is in the Gaza East area and another one in Gaza Central area. The first one that targeted two schools in east of Gaza claimed the life of 15 Palestinians and left 30 other injured. Some of them are in a very critical condition. Those are shelters that are used by the Palestinian families, that are used by the Palestinians, internally displaced people who are seeking safety, people who were moving from Ash-Shaja'iyya after the Israelis asked them to evacuate those areas, and then they moved from Ash-Shaja'iyya to that East Gaza city area, and they ended up being targeted in that particular area. The second incident took place in Al-Burej, where the Israeli occupation forces targeted a house, and in that house they killed around 13 Palestinians. The continuous targeting is taking place also in parts of Khan Yunis and parts of Rafah, and also Palestinians in different parts of East Khan Yunis received another evacuation order and they were asked to move to the already narrowed humanitarian zone in Khan Yunis al-Mawasi area. So the tension is still continuous and the targeted killing is still continuous, and the ones who are bearing the brunt and the ones who are losing their lives are mostly the Palestinian civilians who have been haunted by the ongoing displacement and by the ongoing and continuous quest to seek safety and survival.
That was Akram Al-Satari reporting. Israel has carried out airstrikes targeting Hezbollah's military personnel and infrastructure in Lebanon. Hezbollah has responded by attacking several Israeli military sites. In addition, a dispute has arisen between Israel and Norway, with Israel revoking the diplomatic status of 8 Norwegian diplomats. Jonathan Regev has more from Tel Aviv.
Difficult as it is to call it this way, it's business as usual on the Israel-Lebanon border, meaning Israel strikes with drones, usually looking for a specific Hezbollah operative. One more Hezbollah operative was killed. In response, Hezbollah fires drones and rockets into Israeli territory. That has been happening for 10 months now, since October 8th, since the war on that front began. Israel is bracing for a big response from Hezbollah to the killing of a very prominent Hezbollah official, Fuad Shakar. That was a week ago. Since then, Hezbollah has been threatening with a major response. Hezbollah also said, their chief, Hassan Nasrallah, said earlier this week in a speech that what we're seeing every day on the border, that's not the response they've been promising, but something else, something bigger. And as far as the border itself, what we're seeing today is what we've seen since October 8th, fighting, bombing, but usually confined to the border area or relatively close to it. Nothing beyond that, but of course, according to Hezbollah, that is about to change. Relations between Israel and Norway have not been very good for years now, but they've deteriorated even more as Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz decided to revoke the diplomatic status from 8 Norwegian diplomats who are working out of the Norwegian embassy in Israel, but they're actually working vis-a-vis Palestinian Authority. This, according to the Israeli Foreign Minister, is in response to the fact that Norway recognized the Palestinian state, and also to what the Foreign Minister described as various anti-Israel positions presented by Norway in various international forums. The Foreign Minister deciding to revoke the diplomatic status from 8 workers, 8 diplomats working in the Norwegian embassy. And we've heard reactions from Oslo saying that this action taken by the Israeli Foreign Minister is a very extreme action, yet another extreme action taken by Israel, according to Norway.
That was Jonathan Regev reporting from Tel Aviv. Meantime, Israel has agreed to send a delegation to ceasefire negotiations in Doha next Thursday. Qatar, Egypt, and the United States made the urgent call for the truce talks. Hamas did not immediately respond. As the conflict continues in Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he will not relinquish control over the West Bank. In an interview with Time magazine, he called the West Bank a part of Israel's homeland. He also reiterated his opposition to the establishment of a sovereign Palestinian state. Netanyahu suggested his support for limited self-rule for the Palestinians, with Israel maintaining security control over the occupied territory. Staying in Asia, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has cancelled his planned visits to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Mongolia. This comes as a magnitude 7.1 earthquake hit southwest Japan. The tremor has resulted in at least a dozen injuries but caused no major damage. The government has also lifted the tsunami warning. Terence Terashima reports in Tokyo.
The earthquake occurred about 30 kilometers down off the coast of Miyazaki, and there's been no reports of major destruction. Japan Meteorological Agency said there, after these kind of major earthquake, there may be another major quake that could come anytime within days or week. And asked if Japanese Self-Defense Force has been called for to assist with any damages in prefectures in Kyushu and Shikoku. Hayashi said there's been no need so far, but the Self-Defense Force are always standing by for any eventualities. A tsunami advisory has been lifted in Kagoshima, Kochi, and Ehime Prefecture area, but there have been a tsunami as much as 50 centimeters reported in Miyazaki. So there's been a warning that they should always be prepared while they are moving from or going back home.
That was Terence Terashima reporting from Tokyo. In China, China Anti-Doping Agency has called for an independent investigation into its U.S. counterparts over the cover-up of anti-doping rule violations. The Chinese side said media outlets have revealed the wrongdoings of the United States Anti-Doping Agency in covering up athlete violations it has caught and covered up, allowing the athletes to keep competing. China Anti-Doping Agency said such practices constitute a serious violation of the World Anti-Doping Code, causing severe damage to the rights and interests of clean athletes. The World Anti-Doping Agency has questioned the integrity of its U.S. counterpart. Sun Tianyuan has more.
It is a quite serious accusation, and the World Anti-Doping Association, the agency said in a statement that the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency has threatened the integrity of sporting competitions and has clearly violated the World Anti-Doping Code and its own rules. In a statement, WADA said it's now aware of at least 3 cases where USADA allowed athletes to have taken banned substances to keep on competing without prosecution in exchange for information on other violators. The agency noted in one case an elite athlete who competed at an Olympic qualifier and international events in the U.S. admitted to taking steroids and EPO. The latter is a hormone that may improve endurance. The agency said the athlete was permitted by USADA to continue competing all the way up to retirement. However, the doping case was never made public, mainly due to security reasons. WADA pointed out that they were never disqualified, prize money never returned, and no suspension ever served. The athlete was allowed to line up against their unknowing competitors as if they had never cheated. The agency called it ironic and hypocritical that USADA suspected other anti-doping agencies while the U.S. itself allowed chase to carry on. Social media users were outraged by the rule violations. In an online survey conducted by CGTN, 96% of the 15,000 respondents strongly criticized the U.S. for its double standards in doping regulation. The China Anti-Doping Agency has called for an independent investigation into USADA's cover-up of anti-doping rule violations. In another statement released earlier this week, China criticized the U.S. handling of sprinter Arian Knighton's doping case and called for more frequent testing of American track and field athletes. Knighton tested positive for the performance enhancer trenbolone in March. However, USADA claimed the results was due to food contamination, and the agency cleared his offense and allowed him to compete in the Paris Olympics qualifiers. And some other U.S. athletes have also been involved in doping scandals. In April, track and field athlete Eldridge Bailey tested positive for Ostrin, a type of drug that boosts muscle growth. USADA claimed it was a result of cross-contamination. And also Gil Roberts, who won gold medal at the 2016 Rio Olympics, avoided suspension in 2017 by claiming that his positive test result was caused by kissing his girlfriend who was on medication. However, in 2022, Roberts was found to have taken banned substances again and was punished with a 16-month suspension. And now, only 8 months after since his comeback in 2023, Roberts was handed another 8-year suspension after testing positive once again.
That was Sun Tianyuan on the international outcry against the U.S. anti-doping body. Finally, in Africa, police in Kenya have fired volleys of tear gas as small groups of protesters returned to the streets of Nairobi. The clashes erupted on Thursday as President William Ruto oversaw the swearing-in of his new cabinet. Robert Nagila reports from the Kenyan capital.
It was supposed to be the climax of the protests that have rocked the country for the past 8 weeks. But in the end, few heeded the call to take to the streets. Protesters engaged police in running battles on some streets in the central business district, with police using tear gas to disperse them. Several protesters were detained, while dozens of others, including journalists, were injured. Despite the small numbers, the protests succeeded in disrupting day-to-day activity, with most businesses remaining shut and some streets deserted. The youthful protest began in mid-June against a controversial finance bill sponsored by the government, which sought to raise taxes. But they soon evolved into complaints about governance and Ruto's tenure. The president later withdrew the finance bill following nationwide demonstrations and then sacked his cabinet, a key protest demand.
Being appointed a cabinet secretary of Kenya.
Meanwhile, about 2 kilometers from Thursday's protests, the new cabinet was being sworn in at the president's official residence.
The people of Kenya have made their expectations known in bold terms. They have also made their intolerance for failure, inefficiency, corruption, and ineptitude equally clear.
Ruto included 4 members of the opposition in the cabinet to form what he claims is a government of national unity that will focus on economic growth. Kenya has a largely educated youthful population, but most of its young people are unemployed and demanding real answers to their plight. Online, advocates of the protest say it's not over yet, but President Ruto's government will feel they have withered the worst of the crisis.
That was Robert Nagila reporting from Nairobi. Recapping today's headlines. Israel and Hezbollah have been attacking each other amid growing fears of escalating tensions in the Middle East. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has cancelled his planned visits to Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Mongolia after a magnitude 7.1 earthquake hit southwest Japan. And police in Kenya have fired volleys of tear gas as small groups of protesters returned to the streets of Nairobi. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports, and culture, you can subscribe to The Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Tianyu. Thank you for listening.